I worked as a regular pizza delivery driver during my later years of high school. Because of school, I'd always work the night shifts on Friday and Saturday. It was a pretty laid-back job, and for the most part, I'd just be driving or standing in the shop taking orders on the phone. A couple of my friends worked there too, so I always had someone to talk to. Anyways, it was Friday night, and I'd just gotten back from my last break. The place closes at 1 a.m., so we usually stop accepting orders around 12, as we still have to clean and everything before we leave. It was 11:30, but I figured I'd get a head start on the cleaning just to pass the time. Me and my other two friends were the only ones working that night, and one was finishing up a delivery and the other just went on break after I got back. A couple minutes into cleaning, the phone started ringing, so I picked it up and asked how I could help them. There was an older man on the line, and he asked if we were still open for deliveries. I told him yeah, but we aren't taking any large orders. They said that was okay, and asked for a regular pizza and gave me the address to deliver it to. About 15 minutes later, the pizza was ready and I boxed it up and got in my car. The address was a little more than 10 minutes away, and I was probably halfway there when I pulled up behind another car stopped at a stop sign on an empty road. I waited for a few seconds, looking around to see why he was stopped for so long. Then I honked my horn gently, assuming that he'd just fallen asleep or something. The car still didn't move, so I started to pull around him, but of course just as I did that, he pressed on the gas and jolted forward down the road. I was a little bit annoyed, but I figured it was just some guy being a dick for fun, so I continued down the road. But a couple minutes later, I passed that same car pulled over on the side of the road with its headlights off. I got a really uncomfortable feeling passing them, like something didn't feel right about it. I checked my mirrors for the rest of the way to the house to make sure he wasn't trying to follow me. Finally, I turned down the address's long driveway that went between a forest of trees. I pulled up to the front of the house and put the car in park. Then I made sure I had everything and went up and knocked on the door. I waited a minute or two, and then an old lady answered and asked me what I was doing. I told her I was delivering a pizza here and recited the address to her that I was given. She said that nobody here ordered a pizza, and I could tell she felt bad for me. I just thanked her and went back to my car. This wasn't the most uncommon thing to happen, as some people would do it as a prank or just give the wrong address on accident. I figured I'd get out of the lady's driveway, then call my friend to have them call the number back and confirm the address. So I started making my way out of the driveway. But as I was making my way down, bright headlights blinded my view from ahead of me. It was so bright, I knew it had to be a car coming towards me, so I quickly pressed on the brakes. I waited for the car to turn off the lights or turn their car around, but after waiting for a little bit, I figured they weren't going to move. I wasn't sure exactly what to do, as I could barely see and I knew the driveway was thin, so there was no way I could get around them. I decided to just wait and see what they do first, as I didn't really have any other options. A whole minute went by of both of us just sitting there before they turned their lights completely off. I waited for my eyes to readjust to the darkness, then looked ahead to see where their car was, but I couldn't see it. I put the car back in drive and slowly began making my way down, being cautious in case the other car started coming down the driveway again. A few seconds later, I see the car with all its headlights off parked in the middle of the path. I recognized it as the same one that was parked at the stop sign. I guess he had followed me without me noticing. I couldn't see through the windows in the dark, so as I sat there, I started to get pretty anxious and worried that there could be multiple people in there with bad intentions. Then the front driver door opened, and a man got out and began making his way towards me. Halfway to my car, he stopped and began waving at me as if he wanted me to pull up next to him. At this point, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I was really starting to freak out. I tried my best to pretend to be calm though, and rolled the car next to him. To my surprise, when I pulled up, he didn't say anything to me. He didn't even look at me, as he started walking around my car and eventually stopped right behind me by the trunk of my car. I looked in my rear view mirror, trying to figure out what he was doing and why he was just standing there. A few moments go by as I'm looking at this man, when I suddenly come to a realization and turn my head around to the front. The other 3 doors of the car swing open and 3 more men start sprinting towards my car. My adrenaline started pumping, and I stomped on the gas, flooring it and almost hitting one of the men as I turned my car off the driveway. I swerve around their car, nearly hitting several trees before making it back onto the path and eventually out onto the main road. There was nobody else on the road at this time, so I could clearly see in my mirror when the car pulled out onto the road and started making its way towards me. I figured they weren't going to stop unless I could get somewhere that wasn't so isolated, but after 30 seconds, the men turned down a side road. I made it back to work and immediately told my friends what happened. They both convinced me to call the police to at least report it, even though I wasn't able to give much helpful information. An officer came down, and I gave an official statement on the incident, and then they left just before we closed. I was surprised to get a call the next day saying that 3 of the men had been arrested after attempting to rob another car later that night in the same exact driveway that I was in. The men were caught when the lady called the police after having 2 more people try and deliver food to her that she didn't order. I guess they were using that driveway to lure delivery drivers in and rob them on the way out, since it was a narrow, isolated driveway surrounded by forest. Unfortunately though, the 4th man was able to run through the trees and make it out, and I never received any updates on him in the following days, so I'm not sure if he was ever found. The old lady said though that she was unaware and had never seen them in the driveway before that night. It's pretty crazy that this happened to me, but I'm also proud of myself for how quickly I reacted and how I was able to make it out unharmed. It definitely made my job more stressful though, and soon after I was able to change my shifts to only working during the day on the weekends. I really hope that last guy got caught though, because who knows how many more people could be in those horrifying situations due to his escape. It was the beginning of fall, and I worked as a cashier at a small store near my apartment. My usual shift ended at 9 p.m., and then I'd usually go do food deliveries for a couple of hours before heading home. I actually enjoyed doing deliveries at night, as the roads weren't busy and most other delivery drivers would work during the day and would take all the orders, so I'd actually get more orders to do at night. Anyways, I had just gotten out of work and set up my app to get ready to do some deliveries. The first one that came in was quick and only took about 15 minutes. Then I waited for a few minutes before the next order came in. It was a good payout and the delivery address was 20 minutes away from where I was. I headed over to the fast food restaurant to pick up their food, then started making my way over to the house. The town I live in isn't too big and has a lot of empty plots of land. There's the main center of town, which is where my apartment is, and most of the restaurants. Then about 10 minutes out, there's a lot of farmland, and the houses are much more spread out. Almost all of the deliveries I get are within the town area, but every once in a while I'll get a delivery further out into the farm area. I assumed this was going to be a farmhouse since it was 20 minutes away. However, the app said that the address was located in a small neighborhood area just off of a small highway. I didn't like delivering to isolated farmhouses at night, as it just kind of creeped me out, so I was happy to be delivering to a neighborhood home. Once I got off the highway, I turned left and started making my way down the road toward the neighborhood. But almost immediately, I got a call from an unknown number. I declined it as I thought it was just a scam, but just a few seconds later they called again. Figuring it was probably the customer, I accepted it. "Hello?" I asked. A few seconds went by with no response, so I just hung up. But then again, just a few moments later, the same number called me. I answered, and almost immediately a guy speaks and tells me I turned the wrong way. I asked him what he meant, as I have the map up and it says that I'm going the right way, but he said his address gets messed up on the delivery app and that he always has to call and let the drivers know where to go. I said okay and asked him how to get there. He told me that when I got off the highway, I needed to take a right from that road, then take the third left. He mentioned it was a gravel path that led to his farmhouse at the end. I told him I'd be there in a few minutes and turned the car around. I've had multiple customers call me before to tell me that the address was a little off, or to give me directions on unnamed roads, as it was pretty common out here, so I honestly didn't think much of it. I passed the highway that I turned off of and continued until I found the third left and turned onto the gravel path. The path went into a small forest of trees and it was really dark. Again, I didn't like these areas at night, so I was definitely a little nervous driving down this isolated gravel road. Once I started getting nervous, I began thinking about how strange it was that the map had taken me so far in the opposite direction of the house that the man claims is his actual address. I tried to bury those thoughts, assuring myself that I was just overthinking it because I was nervous. A couple minutes passed though, and there was still no house in sight. At this point, I wasn't even sure if I had turned down the right path. But the trees were too close to the sides, so I didn't have much room to turn around anyways. I figured I'd continue down to the end, then call to ask if I had the right place, and turn around there if not. Another minute or two went by before I finally reached the end, as it merged into a small circle driveway next to a house. I drove up to the path that led to the front door, and parked the car next to a for sale sign that was put up in the front of the house. Seeing that, I wasn't sure if I had the right house, but I looked over at the front door and it was open, and I could see someone further back wave at me. Figuring I was good, I grabbed the bag and started making my way over to the door. As I stepped onto the porch and began putting the bag down, I saw the man again down the hallway that led to the kitchen. He politely asked me if I could set the food down on the kitchen counter, then quickly walked away as if he was in a rush, and then I heard him turn the sink on in the kitchen. Hesitantly, I took a step into the house and looked around. It was decorated with old furniture and accessories, but it almost looked like it was completely unused. I quickly made my way down the hall and into the kitchen, but as soon as I got there, I noticed that the sink was still running, but the man was nowhere in sight. This made chills run down my body, and I quickly set the bag down on the counter and got out of there as quick as I could. I could hear the man yell something from the front door as I got back in my car, but I couldn't understand what he said. I put the car in drive and went back out the way I came. I didn't stop driving until I got to the parking lot of my apartment. Then I pulled my phone out and saw multiple missed calls from that same number. I blocked the number, then opened the delivery app so I could end my deliveries for the night. But that's when I noticed that I had messages from the customer through the app, telling me that I had turned the wrong way and that I was at the wrong house. I went into shock for a moment, realizing that the man that had called me wasn't my actual customer, and the house I was in was just some stranger's house. I called the police immediately and reported everything to them. An officer came to my apartment to go over more details soon after. I had no idea how this man could have known that I was doing a delivery and had been able to see my location. The officer said that my phone had likely been hacked and that the man was probably monitoring everything that I was doing. Hearing this made me really uncomfortable. As if all of that wasn't bad enough, the next day I was informed that the house I was at was actually vacant, as it was for sale by the owners who had moved out months ago. The man had apparently gotten in through an unlocked window in one of the rooms. As of right now, they still haven't found anything significant that could lead to finding the man, which makes me feel really unsafe. I don't know for sure what the man was trying to do, but I think it's a pretty good assumption that he was probably planning on kidnapping me, or maybe even worse. I try not to think about it too much, but I can't help but go over all of the horrible things that could have happened on that night. I worked as a food delivery driver during my first few years of college. Mainly, I would drive for DoorDash or Uber Eats. I didn't like making small talk with strangers and didn't want random people in my car, so I preferred delivering food over being a normal Uber driver. I did this for over a year with pretty much no issues, aside from the occasional customer mad that the restaurant messed up their order. Anyways, it was late Wednesday night, and I didn't have any classes in the morning, so I decided to make an extra few bucks and deliver for a little bit. I did 4 or 5 quick orders, and ended up about 20 minutes from my dorm. It was about 1 a.m. now, and I figured I should probably end it there and head back. The way the delivery apps work is pretty much you just drive around and wait for a random order to pop up, and then it'll give you an estimate of how much you'll make and how far it is. Then you either accept or decline it. On my way back, I left the app running just in case there was a really quick delivery nearby. I got a few requests, but they were a bit too far and didn't seem worth it to me. But then another one popped up just as I was pulling into my dorm. It was about 12 miles away, but the payout was really big. I'd never seen anyone offer that much money before. I gave it some thought, as it was pretty far, but it was too much money to pass up. I accepted the offer and started the directions to the restaurant. A few minutes later, I arrived and pulled up their order so I could make sure I picked up the right stuff. As I walked through the doors, I noticed the customer had only ordered 2 items, and the total was only over $6. This was really unusual, as typically the high-paying orders are because of large deliveries of expensive food. This meant that they were just giving me a really big tip. I got the food and went back to the car. During the drive there, I was really just trying to understand why they would give such a big tip for such a small order. It was a little weird, but honestly, I just came to the conclusion that it was either just a mistake or they were trying to be kind. Although 12 miles wasn't too far from my campus, I had actually never been to this area. It was really nice, with mostly gated-off neighborhood communities and huge houses. Luckily, their house wasn't gated, and I was able to just pull into the neighborhood. I looked at the homes as I passed by, and realized that the tip money made a lot more sense now. The street was long though, and I was just a couple minutes from the house when the customer sent me a text through the app. They told me to make sure I delivered the food to the right address when I pulled up. I figured maybe the map showed his neighbor's house or something, so when I arrived, I sent him a text with a description of the house and asked if that was the right one. He replied no, and I waited for a little bit, expecting him to describe his house for me, but he never did. I sent him another text describing his neighbor's house, to which he replied no again. I was starting to get pretty annoyed with this guy, and tried calling him instead, but he refused to answer. It would ring a few times, and then he'd decline the call. I looked at the address again, and then copy and pasted it into Google to try and look it up there. Doing this, I actually noticed that the number for the address wasn't a regular number. It had a subset of numbers on it. I'd never seen this before and wasn't even sure what it meant, so I searched the address on Google and looked at the results. When I zoomed in on the map, I saw that the address actually pointed to a spot right in between the 2 houses. Zooming in further, it looked like there was a really small garage, or maybe even a shed. It was barely visible. I looked up from my phone and moved my eyes to between the two houses, and sure enough, there was a small garage-like structure. It was just a few feet from the main house that my delivery app brought me to. I honestly wasn't sure what to expect or why someone would even live there, but I already came this far, so I wasn't about to walk away now. So I got out and started heading over. As I walked up the driveway, I could clearly see what the place was. It was pretty much just a large storage garage, probably meant for keeping an old car or something. I didn't see any normal door though, so I put the bag down by the garage door. As I began taking my phone out to take a picture for the app, a man came around the right side of the garage. I looked over at him, and he just stood still, staring at me. The guy was really creeping me out, so I said, "It's right here for you, sir," as I pointed at the bag and slowly started walking away. Then he replied, telling me that this wasn't where he wanted me to drop it off. I turned around and noticed that he was still standing in the same spot. Sorry, where did you want me to put it?" I said, starting to get really uneasy about the situation. He pointed around the back of the garage and said that the door was over there. At that point, there was no way I was going to follow that guy to wherever he was trying to get me to go. I just kind of stood there for a moment, then said sorry and quickly walked back to my car. I looked over one more time before driving away, and the man was walking back behind the garage, but he left the bag of food. I got out of there and drove back to my dorm, shaking the whole way back. Something about that whole thing felt very off, and the fact that it was in a really nice neighborhood made me even more confused. The more I thought about it though, I realized just how strange it was that he needed to specify for me not to deliver to the main house, and that he refused to take the food unless I followed him to behind the garage. I'd never had to call the police before in my whole life, and I ended up not calling them this time either, as I really wasn't sure if maybe he was just some weird harmless guy. Anyways, it freaked me out for a few days, but eventually I got over it and continued doing deliveries in my spare time. Nothing else happened, though a couple weeks later I had another big order pop up on my app, and the area of delivery was the same. I obviously declined it, but I couldn't help but think about whoever ended up accepting that order and what happened to them during their delivery.
I used to babysit my younger brother a lot while growing up. I was 5 years older, so by the time I was 13 or 14, my parents were okay with me watching over him while they would go out. They would never leave us alone for too long though, never more than just a few hours at a time. This happened when my parents went to a work party together one night on the weekend. They left at 5 and told me they would be back before 9. They left us food in the fridge and told me to watch my brother and call if I needed anything. To me, watching my brother actually meant just making sure nothing happens to him or that he doesn't leave. I never actually sat there and watched over him and whatever he was doing. I'd help him turn on his favorite show and then go do whatever I wanted to do in the other room. Sometimes I would hang out with him, but our age difference made it hard for us to enjoy doing the same things. I was in my bedroom, which was still on the first floor, and my brother was in the living room when the doorbell rang. My parents had only been gone for an hour, so I knew it wasn't them. I got up and went to the front door. My brother was standing up in the living room, looking over at the door, and that's when I saw a man looking through the small side window on the porch. When he noticed me, he waved and pointed at the door as if to meet him there. I don't know if a lot of houses have these, but ours had 2 front doors. There was a main wooden door with a metal gate-like door in front of it. We always kept both locked. I opened the main door partially, but kept the gate door shut. I didn't know what to say, so I let him talk first. "Hi, buddy. Are your parents home?" he asked.
No, not right now, sorry.
I said, thinking he was trying to sell something.
Oh, thank you,
he said, turning and walking away. I closed the door and my brother asked who it was. I said it was just some random guy, then went back into my room. I really forgot about it and didn't think of it for a while. I made food for us a while later, then turned a show on for my brother and went back to my room to play on my console. But then I heard the front door open. I got up, confused and a little frightened. But before I could make it down the hall and over to the door, I heard the metal door unlock and open. I saw my little brother standing in the doorway, and that same man from earlier stepping inside our house. I didn't know what to do. The man greeted me again, but I didn't respond. I think I was in so much shock, I was just staring at him blankly. He faced my little brother and knelt down, starting to whisper something to him, and that's when I started moving over to my brother. The man then tried to put his arms around him, like he was trying to pick him up, but I quickly grabbed my brother's arm and pulled him back. The man eased off, putting his hands up like he wasn't doing anything.
Don't worry, buddy, I just want to show him something. You can come too if you want, it's right outside,
he said with a friendly smile that was very creepy at the moment. I backed up, holding my clueless brother close to my side.
Please leave,
I said, trying hard not to cry. He was still smiling, trying to act nice and caring.
I called the police already. Please, just go.
The man's whole attitude and face changed as soon as I said that. His smile went away and was replaced by anger and frustration. He took a step closer, and I yelled at the top of my lungs, screaming for help. The man backed up quickly and rushed out the front door, driving away in his truck. I called my parents right away, and they called the police for me. While we waited for everyone to show up, I yelled at my brother for letting the man in. He was crying and told me that the guy wanted to give him something. I knew my brother was too young to understand, but my emotions were taking over me, and I still yelled at him. The police made it first, and then my parents. They yelled at me for not watching over my brother. The man was seen on a neighbor's doorbell camera, leaving our house and driving away, but it was too dark to get any identity from the video. We were all sure, though, that the man had been watching us for a while, trying to find the perfect time to kidnap us. He got really close, but thankfully after that day, he never tried anything else.
Last year, 2018, was a very busy year for me, meaning that I had little to no time to date or meet any girls. Due to my busy schedule, I decided to make a Tinder account. I have never had any experience with such an app or online dating, and I didn't actually plan on meeting up with a random girl to go on a blind date or anything. I just wanted to see what the fuss was about and if it actually worked. So the app, still being something new to me, I matched with this really pretty girl. She seemed short, light-skinned, and had a nice smile. Her account wasn't a catfish or any sort of fake profile, it seemed genuine and legit. I know that I didn't actually want to hit it off with any girl in this manner, but she was very hot and I said, screw it. So I slid into her DMs with a simple, hey. A couple of hours went by and we got each other's Snapchat usernames and phone numbers. We exchanged Snapchat photos, so with that said, there's no way that her Tinder account was fake. I felt better knowing that for some reason. She said that she lived in the city that was about 25 to 30 miles north of mine. I had nothing planned for the next day, and neither did she, so we decided to meet up at her house the next day to mess around. The next day came by, and we planned to meet up at around 10:30. The neighboring city where she was from was about a 30 to 45-minute drive from my place, so around 10 p.m.-ish. I decided to start driving over. As I am driving over, I get a phone call from her telling me to instead go over at a later time, around midnight. I didn't mind since I had friends who lived in her city, so I paid them a visit. Meanwhile, I waited for her. 11:45 p.m. rolled by and I started to drive to her place. My friends didn't know what I was up to, they just thought I popped in to visit them randomly. So this girl sends me her address, and at first the address that she had sent me led me to this upper-class suburban neighborhood. I reached the address and it was close to what I would describe as a white mansion. I called her to tell her that I was parked in her driveway, and I asked her to come outside so I could assure myself that I was at the right place. She said, "I don't see you. Are you sure you followed the directions?" Well, to avoid any more mess-ups, she just sent me her current location through iMessage. At first, I found it odd, but I followed the directions to the location anyway. So midnight rolled by and I was on my way to her current location, which was actually kind of far from the address that she had originally sent me. As I am driving, the directions are telling me to drive off the path and into a dirt road surrounded by cornfields. This spooked me a little because I was now in the middle of nowhere. I was about 10 minutes away from any civilization. Red flags started to go off in my head, but I ignored them because there was no way that her account could have been a setup. I've seen her pictures on Snapchat, and you can't Photoshop those as far as I'm aware. So after driving through a dark dirt road through the cornfields, the directions led me to a broken-down old house. It looked uninhabitable. There were no cars outside or in the driveway, and the only light I saw was the porch light. I called this girl to tell her that I was outside. She replies with, "Okay, I'll be right out." On a side note, I'm a pretty big dude and I train every day. I'm not intimidated by others, but there are some situations where you are helpless and have no option but to evade for the fear of your life. So I'm waiting by my car, and then I see this figure come out the front door, and it was dressed like a freaking nun. Black veil, long black dress, voodoo charms, and she's also holding a voodoo doll on her left hand. I was pretty spooked out, but I thought it was just a prank. I gave it a few seconds for the cameras to pop out, but the person just stood there. I slowly started to realize that this wasn't a prank because a few seconds later, I saw another figure in a similar black outfit peeking out of a door and starting to make a run towards me with an actual machete. I don't even bother trying to fight back because I knew I was probably going to end up gutted or skinned alive by these psychos. I immediately jump in the car and floor it out of there. I then heard a gunshot a few seconds later behind me. I'm in my car screaming prayers with tears in my eyes because I was hoping to drive away with my life. Her number then kept calling me as soon as I left. I blocked it, and then another number started to call me, and I blocked it as well. I ended up staying over at a friend's house that night. I explained everything that took place, and he wanted to go check it out together with our group of friends, but I was too terrified to even go back there. I called the police, and they went to go check it out, but the place was abandoned by the time they got there. They said that the address has been vacant for years, and they simply made a report out of it, and they were never found. The whole thing was a sick setup to begin with. The girl was planning on luring me so they could do God knows what to me. I deleted my Tinder account. I'm pretty sure it works if you're only looking to get laid, but I somehow had the worst luck the first time I ever decided to use it. Don't ever meet a stranger somewhere that isn't public. Things can always go sideways.
When I turned 16, I had trouble deciding on what job to get. I really wasn't excited to work at the typical fast food or retail job, but at that age, there weren't many options. I had done babysitting before, but only for my parents' friends. My mom suggested I should try to do it as a part-time job for other people as well, and with no other appealing options, I took her advice. There was a local babysitting company in my town that helped both babysitters find work and parents find babysitters. I had an interview and they approved me to start working there, which was a big help because I didn't know enough people personally to make enough money. I worked there for 2 months, and the only downside was that I almost always babysit for a different family. Mostly it was just parents going away for a special night or something, so they didn't have recurring work for me. I finally had one of the previous parents book another appointment with me. It was a single dad who took care of his daughter, Alyssa. All I remembered about him was that he didn't talk much. He had the next appointment scheduled from 6 to 10, so at 6 o'clock I pulled into his driveway and knocked on his door. He opened the door and gestured for me to come in. I stepped inside and Alyssa came from around the corner to say hi. Then the dad told me very specific, unusual instructions for the night. He said he would be back at exactly 10 p.m., but that I needed to leave a few minutes before that. I simply nodded and said okay, no problem. But after he left, I thought about it more. It was a bizarre request, and I didn't know why he would be so strict about that. Over the time I babysit Alyssa, we did all the usual things. We played a few games, watched some of her favorite shows, and ate a small dinner. At one point, she took a quick nap on the couch, and I decided to walk around the house. Not to be creepy or anything, but just to make sure everything was normal. The dad left me with a bad feeling, so it made me feel better to see that the house was normal. But thinking about it more, I didn't feel comfortable leaving the house before he got home. It didn't feel right, and he made it out to be a little bit creepy. So, come a few minutes before 10, I took Alyssa upstairs and got her ready for bed, then waited on the couch downstairs for the dad to come home. I knew he would probably give me a look or ask why I was still home, but I was sure that he would understand if I explained myself. I kept track of the time on my phone, and at exactly 10, I watched out the window at the driveway for him to come home. A few minutes passed and he still hadn't shown up. Then another 5 minutes and he still hadn't come home. This was only strange because he had been so clear about being home at exactly 10 and even wanted me to leave early. I was glad I stayed at this point because leaving Alyssa alone for more than a few minutes like he said would not have been safe. Once 20 minutes came and went, I tried to call him. The phone rang for a while, then he answered.
Hey, I just wanted to check in and make sure everything was okay. I'm still here waiting for you to come home,
I said. There was a long pause.
I told you to leave before 10. Please, go home now.
I didn't know how to respond, but then he added on.
I'm waiting for you to leave.
I let out a shaky,
Okay.
then hung up. Things were getting really creepy now, and I was not comfortable being in the house, but even less comfortable with leaving Alyssa alone in the house. I decided to call the police. I had no contact with the dad during the 10 minutes I waited for the police to come. But almost as soon as they arrived, the dad pulled into the driveway as well. I explained myself and everything strange that was going on, but the dad denied ever telling me to leave before he got home, or that he was waiting for me to leave. He claimed he was just running late, and that over our phone call he told me that he'd be home in a few minutes, nothing else. He allowed them to look around, but nothing came up. Nothing else happened, and they had me go home. They told me that even if I did have proof of what he'd said, they really couldn't charge him with anything unless it was linked to something else. It aches my heart knowing that Alyssa is still alone with her dad, who is definitely up to something. Otherwise, why would he try so hard to hide it and lie about everything he told me? My lease agreement was coming to an end, and the owners of the home decided they wanted to sell the house after this lease, so I was forced to find a new place instead of renewing the lease like I'd planned on. It's unfortunate because they only gave me a month's notice, which is not a lot of time to find a new house. I worked full time, which only made things harder. The first 2 weeks flew by, and I only had the next 2 weeks to find a house, pack, and move in. I was stressed out of my mind. With time running out, I just applied to 3 houses nearby without even touring them. 2 of them declined me, but I got accepted by the 3rd. From the pictures, it didn't look nearly as nice as the house I was staying at, but I did the best I could with the shitty situation I was given. I rented a U-Haul and got my stuff over as soon as possible. After getting all the boxes inside and all the furniture where it needed to be, I finally had a chance to look at the house. It was a lot worse than the pictures had shown. The walls had paint peeling, and everything just looked aged and outdated. The rent was cheap, but not enough to make up for the trashy condition of the place. I was too tired to take care of anything right away though, so I got my bed ready and crashed for a quick nap. I slept a lot longer than I wanted to, and woke up well rested around 9 p.m. I checked my phone and saw I had a text from the landlord. He just greeted me and told me to call him if I needed anything. It was already pretty late though, so my angry call was gonna have to wait until tomorrow. I closed my phone and went downstairs to make myself something to eat. Right when I turned the corner into the kitchen, I jumped back. A man was standing in the middle of the living room, looking right at me.
What the fuck?
I said under my breath, not sure what to do yet. It was really dark and I couldn't read his face. He was just kind of blank.
What are you doing here?
I said. The man turned around and walked out the front door in no hurry at all. My first instinct was to run up and lock the door. Then I called the landlord, but he didn't pick up. I looked out the windows to see if he was still around, but he seemed to have left for good. Calling the police crossed my mind, but I was just so confused by the whole interaction, I didn't even feel threatened really. I didn't see anyone outside for a while, so I left the windows and sat on the couch. I didn't have my TV set up yet, so I had nothing better to do than start packing. I went through 4 boxes and was working on the 5th when someone knocked on the door. I walked over cautiously and turned on the porch light, then called out, asking who was there. There was a long wait before they answered.
It's me, your landlord.
I opened the door a bit and looked at him. He looked really similar to the man I'd just seen in my house, but I wasn't sure.
Hey, did you need something? I'm just here to make sure you settled in nicely.
He said with a big smile, leaning his hand on the door.
Yeah, I was just about to go to bed. I'll talk to you tomorrow,
I said, pushing the door, but the man outside kept his hand on the door, not letting me close it. I stopped pushing for a moment, and the man smiled again. Then it all hit me at once, the fear and creepiness of the situation. I slammed my body into the door, closing it too quickly for him to react, then turned the bolt lock. I heard the door handle turn, and the man outside bash against it. There was another long wait before the man sprinted away from the porch. I called the police, then got my car keys and put them in my pocket to prepare for a quick escape if I needed to. I waited for a couple minutes, still just standing by the front door, before I heard leaves crunching around the house. They went to the back door and stopped. I walked up a bit and peered around the corner, and right in front of the back door was that same man, standing outside with a hammer in his hand. I took this chance to run for my car. I opened the front door and ran to my car in the driveway. I got in and locked the doors, then backed out. I saw the man on the side of my house watching me as I drove away. The man was gone when the police got there. They did a whole investigation, and during it, I met the landlord in person. He was not the man I saw at my door, but he did look oddly similar. He even talked in a very similar way. It made me wonder if he had a brother or something. I don't know, It could also be a creepy neighbor or a homeless person. Either way, I never encountered the man again, but once my lease was up, I moved out and never looked back. This was my first time ever purchasing a house. I was 28 and looking for a place to settle down. I began my search for a house 5 months before my lease ended at my current residence. This one place that I found was perfect, but it was pretty far over my budget, so I had to pass on it and keep searching. I viewed a ton of other places and even thought I'd found a good home until that same house came up on my search again. The price had been lowered tremendously, putting it in the mid-range of my budget. I scheduled a tour and eventually bought the home. Obviously, I was ecstatic. It felt like a really big move forward in my life. It was a 2-story home with a basement and large yard with trees all around. The only slight issue was that it was 20 minutes away from most stores and shops, but I worked from home, so I didn't need to go out all that much. Within the first few days, though, things got a little strange. While working from the living room one day, I heard some sounds coming from the basement. Things moving around or dragging on the floor. I got up and opened the door to the basement, but the sound stopped. It was silent. I turned on the light and walked a few steps down, but nothing was there. I had only a couple boxes in the basement, so it was entirely empty aside from the water heater and air conditioner in the far corner. I'd only been in the place for a couple days, so I thought I just wasn't used to the sounds the house made. After all, there wasn't anything in the basement. But only a day later, I heard it again. This time, it was more of a soft wooden sounding thud. Maybe a piece of wood hitting the wall. I went down the basement stairs all the way this time and did a perimeter check around the walls, but again, the basement was empty, so there was nothing to even check. Still, I blew it off. What could it possibly even be? I didn't believe in anything paranormal, so logically, it had to be the house. During the first week of staying in my new house, I had experienced these sounds probably 6 or 7 times. By the 4th or 5th time, I stopped even checking and started ignoring it. That was until I explored the outside of my house. I was just walking around, enjoying the nature scene, when I noticed one of the tops of the basement window wells was missing from the side of my house. It in itself wasn't an alarming find, but just something I needed to fix right away before it rained and flooded my basement. I went out and got a cover from a hardware store and installed it that day. That night, I went to bed early, but woke up at 11 p.m. to another wooden thud sound from the basement directly below me. A second later, I heard something else. This time, it was very distinctly footsteps going from one side of the basement to the other. I was horrified. Part of me was absolutely positive there was someone in my basement, but there was another part of me that thought it could be something I was imagining, or even somehow another noise from the house. I needed to know for sure though. I took my bat that I kept in my room and walked downstairs and over to the basement door. Just before I approached it though, an extremely loud thud came from outside the house. I stopped in my tracks, waiting for anything else. Then I opened the basement door and walked down slowly. Nothing was there, just the same empty basement. I looked all around and even waited for a few minutes for more sounds, but it was just like every other time when I went to investigate. As soon as I'd open the basement door and look around, it would be silent. I got really uneasy after a few minutes and went back upstairs. I put a chair in front of the basement door so that if there was somehow someone down there, I'd at least have a heads up if they tried to open the door. The next morning I checked the basement again, but something felt different. It was much brighter than usual. I checked the window well and could see from the bottom that the top cover was gone again. I went outside and looked around everywhere for it, but it was completely gone. That was enough for me to call the police though. Something was going on. They sent one officer who took notes from me, then searched around the basement. He found just as little as I did. I got a new cover for the well and hired a handyman to come out and install bars on the window from the inside. After that, I never experienced any more sounds or noises. I don't know what exactly I was dealing with in my basement. Maybe someone squatting there, or maybe something else. Even now though, 3 years later, I still have that fear in the back of my mind of hearing those sounds again. Me and my best friend, who I'll call Alex for privacy, decided to rent a house together. We talked about being roommates for a while, because neither of us wanted to live with our parents anymore. We were attending community college and had jobs, so it felt like moving out was just the next step. We found this really small, but still somewhat nice home that was only a 10-minute drive to school. This was last year when COVID was still big, so we were able to schedule a self-tour and look at it ourselves. We both thought it was that perfect, kinda crappy yet cheap house for us to spend our college years in. It even had a decent yard and wasn't crammed together with neighbors all around. One thing that caught our attention though was this creepy old shed in the backyard. I mean, it just looked like a regular shed I guess, but it had a padlock on it, and in the description of the house online, it didn't mention it anywhere. Neither of us cared to use it anyway, so we ignored it and signed the lease. I was super pumped, and I could tell Alex was too. A month later, we moved in. The first week was great. This was both of our first times living on our own, so the freedom of it was amazing. On a normal Saturday night, I was in the living room watching TV, waiting for Alex to come home from work. It was only 7, and Alex got off at 8. Through the TV playing, I heard what I could have sworn was a large door shutting. It came from outside, and my first thought was the shed. There was absolutely no way I was going out there to check by myself. When Alex got back, I told him what I heard. He asked me over and over if I was sure it wasn't from the TV or something, but I knew it wasn't.
Alright, let's take a look then.
We turned our phone flashlights on and went outside. We were maybe 20 feet away from the front of the shed, and everything looked exactly how it was before. The lock was still on the front, so there was no way someone could have gone inside and locked it from the outside. Alex gave me a look like I was crazy. We went back inside and watched TV for a while. I couldn't stop thinking about what I heard though. I was starting to question whether or not the sound was even real. At one point, while watching TV, I looked to my side and a figure was standing outside the window staring at us. Alex didn't see him, but he heard his footsteps running away, so we were on the same page this time. Alex asked what we should do, and I didn't know. We'd never had to deal with something like this before. I wasn't sure if that guy had something to do with the sound I heard earlier either. We kept our eyes and ears open for a couple hours, and with no further strange sightings, we went to bed. It took a bit for me to fall asleep, but I think I finally dozed off around 10 p.m. Woke up in the middle of the night to a strange, bright red glow flickering across the walls of my room. It was coming through the slits in my window. As I became more awake, I realized I was hearing something too. A soft crackling sound, also coming from outside. I was still tired, and my head wasn't fully awake, but then I heard Alex call my name from the hallway outside my room.
Hey, wake up!
As I was about to ask what was going on, I was interrupted by something eerie, horrifying, and loud. I turned my head to the window, pushing aside the covers. The shed was in flames and had just fallen over. The huge fire was getting close to the house. Alex called 911, and we both took his car and drove across the street. The fire department was able to get the fire extinguished before it got too serious. Only minor burn damage was done to the side of the house. We told the police about what we'd heard and the man I saw, thinking maybe he had done this, but there was nothing to go off of. Everything that was inside the shed was ashes, except a few old metal tools. It makes me think that someone was doing something in there and probably burned it down to hide evidence of their doings as soon as we moved in. It all just seems like too much of a coincidence. I don't think we'll ever know what exactly happened that night though, or what was going on inside that shed. I'd been working the night shift at the gas station for almost a year at this point. It's not the best job, but it pays my cheap bills. The hours are long and the work is repetitive. I thought many times about quitting and finding work somewhere else, and this incident was my breaking point. It was a typical night at the gas station. I had just finished cleaning off the pumps and restocking the shelves when I saw the headlights of a car pulling into the lot. It was an old, beat-up car with tinted windows. As the car pulled up to the pump, I could see that there was only one person inside. He got out and started walking up to the door. It was a man, probably in his mid-30s. He had dark hair and was wearing a black leather jacket and looked like he hadn't slept in days. I greeted him with a smile and asked him if he needed any help. He didn't say anything, but just threw a 20 on the counter and went back out to fill up his tank. It was a bit rude, but that's normal when working at a gas station, especially late at night when nobody wants to talk. I watched out the window as he filled up his tank, but a couple minutes passed and he was still there with the pump in his car. I knew he only put $20 in, so he had to have finished a while ago. I waited another couple minutes, then I opened the door and started to say something, asking if he needed any help, but he just got back in his car and drove away. I blew it off and went back inside the store, but as the night wore on, I started to feel like something was off. I don't know how else to describe the feeling. Nobody else was pulling in to get gas, and it was really quiet outside. Then, I heard a noise coming from the back of the store. It sounded like a box falling off a shelf. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way to the back of the store. As I turned the corner, there was a man standing there going through our inventory. He was tall and skinny and looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. I froze in fear, not sure what to do. The man turned and saw me, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Then he started to walk towards me, his eyes fixed on mine. I backed away slowly, putting my hands up as if to not mean any harm, but he kept coming towards me. I could smell alcohol in his breath, and I knew that he was dangerous.
"Money, where is it?"
he said, slurring his words. I saw in one of his hands he had a switchblade, and with him being clearly drunk, I was really scared. I pointed toward the register, and he pushed me back to the counter. As I was opening the till, the man wandered around the store, making his way to the liquor section. He stashed a few expensive bottles in his backpack, then came back to the register. I put all the bills we had on the counter, being barely over $100. The man looked at it, then looked at me.
"The f*** is this? I need more, man."
He wasn't satisfied, but there was no more money to give. He flipped open his blade, waving it around and yelling at me. I was sure he was going to jump the counter and beat me to death, but then he suddenly swiped the cash and bolted out the door. My heart was pounding as I looked out the window, seeing that same beat-up car from earlier. The man got inside and they drove off. The police came a few minutes later, responding to the emergency button I pressed while the man was browsing the booze, but they weren't too helpful right away. Thankfully though, the cameras outside the building were able to pull a license plate from the car, and 4 days later, I was informed that both men were caught. Apparently they were homeless and had stolen the car. They then went on a crime spree, robbing as many stores as they could, mostly just of alcohol and money. I feel pretty lucky to have made it unharmed, because their erratic behavior sent one worker to the hospital after an encounter with them. A couple weeks later though, I quit my job and moved to work in the day shift somewhere else. I've worked at a graveyard for the past 15 years. Most of those years being the typical graveyard shift, which was from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. In my mind, working overnight had way more benefits than working during the day. Day workers had more to do since more people would be visiting the yard. There would also be burials taking place a few times a week that need to be arranged. And, above everything else, night shift gets paid an extra $2 an hour. I've seen a lot during my years working night shift though, mostly teens messing around or the occasional drunk group of friends daring each other to walk through the yard. However, this night was different. I got to the small faculty building a bit early to chat with the day worker, and once he left, I did all of the normal checks and precautions at the beginning of my shift. Afterwards, my only job is really just to drive around in a golf cart every so often and just make sure nothing's going on. I'd say I only encounter something once a month, or maybe even every other month. Anyway, the first few hours were normal. I drove around several times, then went back to the small faculty building to eat my lunch. I think it was around 2 a.m. when I went back out to do another round of the yard. As I got to the far end, I saw something by the fence. It was obviously really dark, so I couldn't see much more than the general shape of a figure standing there. I drove up closer. I could tell now that it was a man standing on the outside of the fence, looking toward me. I didn't want to confront him if I didn't have to, so I turned and drove in a small loop around the lot to see if he would try to hop the fence while I was gone. But when I got back after 30 seconds, he was gone. I scanned the area briefly to make sure he didn't sneak in, but it all looked clear, so I continued with my patrol. Going through the whole yard takes about 15 minutes, but sometimes I'd go slower just to pass the time. I went all the way around and decided to check back on the spot where I saw the man. I really didn't have anything better to do anyways. I started driving down there, and almost immediately, I spotted the man again. He was inside the yard, standing on the gravel path. I drove up closer again, but the man didn't move. I exited the golf cart and started walking up to him. He looked like a 40-year-old man. I stopped just a few feet away from him.
"Sir, you can't be in here. I need to escort you out,"
I said, but he didn't even turn his head to look at me. After a second, a slight rush of fear went through me.
"Sir, I need you to come with me."
I reached out my hand gently to tap his shoulder. As soon as I did, he whipped his head around to look at me. He just stared into my eyes. He looked full of rage. I took my hand away, and the man turned around and started walking away. I got back in my golf cart, preparing to call the police, as I watched him go all the way down to the fence. He stepped over it and continued walking away. I was relieved, but still terrified. I drove straight back to the faculty building and went inside. It was a small, single-room, security-type building, but but I felt a lot safer and calmer inside. I sat down and caught my breath. In all my years, I'd never really been scared because it was always just people messing around, but this was different. I waited inside for a while, I'm not sure how long, until I heard a bang on the door. I jumped out of my chair and stared at the door in fear. A few seconds later, they banged on the door again. These were aggressive knocks, not those of someone friendly. I had nowhere to go. I picked up the desk phone and called 911. I didn't know what they wanted or why they were here, but I wasn't going to risk it all to find out. After probably 3 minutes of them banging on the door, I heard them walk away. I still waited for the police to arrive before I opened the door. The following day, my manager was able to pull the CCTV security footage from the building. What I saw was horrifying. Just minutes after I entered the building, the man I'd seen in the yard earlier walked up to the door. He stood there silently for nearly 15 minutes before he banged on the door. He was also holding something in his hand, but the footage wasn't detailed enough to make out the object. It was likely a small pipe or bat of some sort. The man was never identified, but I still work the same job at the graveyard and haven't seen him since. I'm a receptionist at a local hotel, and most of my shifts are overnight. I'm in charge of the front desk, and my main responsibilities are to check in guests, answer phone calls, and keep an eye on the security cameras. It's usually a pretty quiet job, since our hotel isn't the biggest or busiest. This night, the hotel was mostly empty. There were only a few guests staying with us. I was sitting at the front desk on my phone when I saw a man start walking towards the doors outside. I stood up and greeted him when he came inside. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and said,
"I need a room for the night."
He was definitely high on something, but regardless, I checked him in and gave him a key to his room. It was standard to allow walk-in bookings when the hotel was less than 75% full. He started walking toward the elevators, and I sat back down and pulled my phone out. A few hours later, I was sitting at the front desk when I heard a noise coming from the hallway. It was a thump sound, like a door trying to be forced open. I got up and walked around the corner to the end of the hallway. The man I checked in a few hours ago was standing there, trying to open up one of our maintenance doors.
"Can I help you find something?"
I asked. He looked over at me with those creepy eyes. I asked again, but he just stared at me. I wasn't really sure what to think. Maybe he was really high and looking for the vending machine or something. I don't know. I didn't want to anger the man though, so I went back to my desk and forgot about it. A good amount of time passed with no activity. No sounds from any of the rooms. Nobody entering the building or walking through the halls. It was around 3 in the morning, and I did a small walk around the bottom floor just to keep myself awake and busy. As I got to the hallway by the front desk though, I heard a very sudden, loud banging coming from one of the rooms. I stopped and listened for a moment, then went up the stairs to the second floor, where I thought it came from. It was very quiet now, which made me somewhat nervous. I walked down the hall, hearing nothing, but when I reached the end, one of the room's doors was open. I listened again for a second before lightly knocking. Nobody responded. I cautiously peeked inside, unsure of what to expect. It seemed empty. I wasn't comfortable walking all the way inside though, so I couldn't really look around, but I was sure nobody was inside. I closed the door and looked at the room number, 112. That was the room I'd given to the man. I never saw him exit the building though. I quickly walked back down to the front desk. I looked at all the security cameras we had in the lobby and outside the building, but the man didn't turn up. I jumped. It was the hotel phone. One of the rooms was calling. I picked it up.
Hello, how can I help you?
There was a woman on the line, telling me about some man knocking on her door in the middle of the night. I apologized and assured her I would take care of it. I hung up and took a deep breath. I was getting really nervous now. I walked around the desk, but then again, the phone started ringing. It was someone else from a different room this time, saying he had the same experience as the other woman, someone knocking at his door in the middle of the night. I called the police right away. I stood by the front doors until they arrived, just in case I needed a quick escape. Luckily they came before anything happened, but they didn't find the man. Instead, they found a broken window in his room, where he likely jumped out of. It was on the second story though, so I'm not sure how he managed to get away without some major injuries. Later, while the police were still searching, they got a report that the car he used to pay for the room was stolen. It's unclear what the man intended to do or why he was knocking on people's doors. I'm thankful none of them opened their doors though, because this case could have been much worse if they had. I rented out an Airbnb in Northern California last summer. While scrolling on the app, I found a ton of nice houses. There was a specific location that I liked though, so I chose to look at houses around there and found that there was almost an entire street of Airbnb rentals. I looked at all of them and chose my favorite and booked it. A month later, I flew in and picked up my rental car, then drove an hour to the Airbnb. I pulled into the driveway, and I should mention that it was really late, like 10 or 11. All I wanted to do was get my stuff inside and crash on the bed, but as soon as I opened my car door, a middle-aged lady from the house next door started waving at me. She was standing in the empty driveway, waving and greeting me to the neighborhood. I smiled and waved back, trying not to get stuck in a conversation. I kept my back to her while I unloaded my suitcase and duffel bag, then walked up the driveway to the door. I could see her in the corner of my eye, still standing there, watching me as I walked up and entered the Airbnb. I locked the door behind me and shook my head in confusion and exhaustion, then carried everything to the bedroom. The house was nice and seemed to be in order, but I didn't bother with really checking it out because I was in a hurry to shower and get in bed. I turned the shower on and washed off, but while I was in there, I heard the doorbell ring. I ignored it, which I would have done even if I wasn't showering. It only rang one time, so I assumed they left, and I didn't even check after I dried off and just went straight to bed. I slept nearly 10 hours and got up well rested in the morning. That day, I went into the city and visited a popular restaurant for dinner, then drove back to the house at 7. When I pulled in, that lady from last night was standing by the front door. When she saw me, she ran back to her house and went inside. I quickly got out of the car and went to the front door, entering the code and going inside. I didn't know who this lady was, but the way she ran once she saw me made me uncomfortable. Over the next hour, I paid attention to all of the windows, checking frequently to see if that lady came back. I was sitting in the kitchen on my laptop when something hit the back door. It sounded like a rock being thrown at it. I looked over at the door. Again, a rock was thrown, hitting the back of the house this time. I stood up and looked out the window, and at first I didn't see anything. But then I looked closely, and in the dark field, I saw a small figure standing there. It knelt down, picked something up, then threw it right at the window I was at. I backed away in shock, until I realized it was probably that lady. I opened the back door and called out, telling them to go away. I could barely see their figure in the dark. They weren't moving though. I threatened to call the police and they still didn't move. A creepy feeling rushed through me and I slid the door shut. I wasn't sure if I actually wanted to call the police. I mean, if it was just some crazy lady, then I didn't really feel threatened. I decided to wait and see if she does anything else. And after a while, it seemed like she'd given up. 2 hours later, I went to bed. By then, I wasn't even thinking about the lady anymore. I woke up in the middle of the night though, hearing something. I didn't know what I heard because it was quick and quiet and I wasn't fully awake yet, but I knew I heard something. Only a few seconds later, the faint sound of footsteps started coming down the hallway outside my room. My eyes widened and my brain went straight into fight mode. I jumped out of bed and swung the door open. Standing just a few feet away from me was that lady, barefoot in my hallway. She quickly ran back and left the house. I followed her out the front door and watched her go back inside her house. Then I locked my front door and called the police. When they came and knocked on the lady's door to confront her, she didn't answer. This is when we found out that her house was actually an Airbnb as well, owned by the same person that rented me my Airbnb. No one had that house booked though, so the lady somehow knew the code and was staying in there for several days. We couldn't find any reason for her to be after me, or any signs of who she was or where she went. I left that night and flew back home. I didn't know what she was going to do if I hadn't woken up, but with her still out there, I didn't want to stay to find out. I turned 18 back in the 90s, and my uncle offered to rent out his summer home by the lake for me and my friends to have a nice spring break trip for the week. He frequently rented out this spot to friends and family, kind of like a family-only Airbnb at the time, and promised me when I was old enough that I could rent it out too. A little backstory on my uncle. He was extremely rich. He owned a few lounges in Vegas and LA with his buddy that were really big back in the day. He was really chill, but I only saw him a few times a year because he was usually in Vegas. But when I did, it was always a good time. My family and I lived in Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin, while my uncle's lake house was in Antioch, Illinois, which wasn't too long of a drive as we were both by the border, so maybe 20 minutes. My parents were hesitant to let me go, and at the time, I thought it was because I was young and they didn't trust me, but after everything I discovered, I don't think that's what they were worried about. Ultimately, they let me go and said I could only bring 4 friends. I only really had 3, so it all worked out. My best friend Tim came with me the night before my other 2 friends were supposed to show up to help me get everything together. My uncle's lake house wasn't big by any means, but it was really nice and even had a pool with a hot tub. He had a whole game room downstairs with pinball machines and a pool table. This house was everything I imagined when I thought of money. We got there around 5, and my uncle had been in town a few days ago to leave me the key inside the mailbox. I gave Tim a tour, and he was in awe at how much cool stuff my uncle had. I was really excited to show him the basement because that was my favorite part, but I noticed the door to the basement had a couple new locks on it, which I didn't think anything of. He did have some pretty expensive stuff down there. Finding the keys to all the locks was really annoying though. When we finally got down there, I started showing him everything, until he mentioned a strange door in the corner that had a desk in front of it. We were both curious, so I opened it to see what was inside. A few boxes were stacked in the corner, and against the wall stood 4 huge gun safes. The first thing out of Tim's mouth was, "What does someone need 4 gun safes for?" And I was thinking the same thing. My uncle doesn't hunt. He never has, at least from what I know, so it definitely wasn't for animals. Tim tried convincing me to look through the boxes, but although I was curious, I couldn't disrespect my uncle like that and invade his privacy. I felt as if we had seen way more than we were supposed to. I led Tim out of the room and locked the door. Skip to a few days later. Tim mentions the room to our other friends, and now that's all they can talk about. I open the door for them to show them the room just to get them to shut up, but it just makes them go crazier, throwing out different theories of what's in the boxes in the gun safes, how many guns he has, or if there's bodies in there. By the end of that night, they were fully convinced he was a serial killer, but I knew my uncle, and he wasn't like that. But my friends pressured me to look in the boxes to make sure they weren't filled with license of missing people or anything. And if it wasn't for one of my friends being genuinely freaked out about the possibility of being in a killer's house, I probably wouldn't have looked, even though the curiosity was killing me too. I told him I'd take a peek, just to ease his mind. I opened the box and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Some pipes and a box of cigars, but mainly a ton of letters. As I shuffled through them, I found my name on one of them. I kept digging and found not just my name, but my parents, my little sister, my aunt and her husband and their children's names, the schools they go to, and my school and my sister's school. And next to all of our names and info was how we would die, some ways being more gruesome than others. By this time, I was fully invested, and I'm looking at everything else in the box, and that's when I find multiple threatening letters addressed to my uncle, basically saying that if the person sending them letters doesn't receive the money, then various awful things are going to happen. There were due dates for the money to be sent, and dates of consequences if not sent by then. And if all of this wasn't scary enough, I saw pictures of my oldest cousin walking around outside her campus with a description on the back of what would happen after they take her if they don't receive their share by whatever date. I put everything back in the box, and my friends were in shock. They consoled me for the rest of the trip and assured me that if nothing bad had happened yet, then nothing will. Most of the dates on the letters were from many years ago, so I agreed with them. But in the back of my mind was this constant thought of my whole family's life being in my uncle's hand. And if he screws up, even by accident, we would all be paying the price for it. I told my dad when I got home, looking for some solace, but the only response I got was don't go through other people's things, and that was the end of it. I lived in fear until 2013, when my uncle passed away, supposedly by suicide. A big part of me wonders if that's true or not, and although I was sad, a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I'm sure the rest of my family felt that too. I vacationed to Yukon, Canada in the fall of 2019. My youngest brother had planned to go with me, but had to cancel a couple weeks before due to work, so I went alone. I rented a cabin through Airbnb. It was remote, but still had paved roads and wasn't too far from town. When I arrived, I got everything out of my truck and into the living room. It was already dark out, so I couldn't see much of the outside of the house, but the inside was nice. It was a simple cabin with cozy decorations in all of the rooms, but it was already a little late and the drive had me tired, so I left everything still packed and sat on the couch. I want to say it was around 7:30 or 8, and I was only on the couch for a few minutes before I heard a disturbing noise from someone out in front of the cabin. It was a person yelling, calling for help. The cabin was so far out, I didn't think anyone would be anywhere nearby, so I was already skeptical. I got up and looked through the front window in the living room. A man was standing outside by my truck, holding a hunting rifle and looking at the cabin. He didn't look hurt, so the only reason I could think that he'd need help was if he was lost. But I still didn't trust the man enough to interact with him while I was alone in a remote area. I pulled the curtain shut and stayed against the wall. The leaves outside started crunching, approaching the front porch. Once the man was at the door, he stopped. I waited against the wall for a whole minute, and the man seemed to just be standing outside the front door.
Hey, I need some help.
He called out.
Please, my friend needs a ride to the hospital.
I thought about replying, but I didn't say anything because I wasn't confident that he was telling the truth. He had a gun, and I had no way to protect myself if he was lying. Another minute passed, neither of us speaking.
I saw you pull in,
he yelled, banging against the door. His tone became aggressive, which only deterred me even more from answering him. That was also just a strange thing to say. Why was he watching me when I pulled in 20 minutes ago? The man's footsteps started leaving the porch and going back in the direction of my truck. I waited until I was sure he had left, then looked out the window again, not seeing him anywhere. I then went around to every door and window and tested the locks. All of them were intact, except for one. It was a small half window in the kitchen, and the latch on it was missing. There were screw holes and scratched paint, indicating a latch used to be installed there, but had been taken off. It was odd and didn't make sense. What reason would anyone have to remove a latch from a window? I was getting really bad feelings with everything going on. I went outside and got my toolkit for my truck bed. I knew it was an Airbnb, and I technically was not allowed to make any modifications to the property, but I didn't care. I drilled 2 long screws through the window siding and into the frame, permanently attaching it so it couldn't be opened. I figured the owners of the cabin would probably never even notice it anyways. After laying on the couch for an hour, watching downloaded videos on my phone, I brought my suitcase to the bedroom and got ready for bed. There was no clock in the room, but I was laying in bed for a long time, definitely over an hour, just unable to fall asleep. That's when I heard some odd noises. A couple thuds on the outer wall of the cabin, then some strange sort of scraping sound. It happened a few times, then it stopped. I was sitting up and staring at the bedroom door, not making any sounds. There were so many scenarios running through my head, mostly consisting of that man from earlier. I was probably sitting there in silence for 30 minutes, listening intently for any other noises. At some point though, long after I heard the noises, I fell asleep. When I woke up, it was morning, but I immediately remembered the sounds I heard last night. I got up and walked slowly through the house. Everything seemed to be fine though, until I checked the kitchen. That small window with the missing latch had a small gap at the bottom, like someone tried to pry it open. I went out the back door and looked at it from outside, seeing scratches and dents. But the creepiest part of everything was that none of the other windows had any scratches or dents. Whoever tried to break in last night only tried to open the small window with the missing latch. I ran back inside and contacted the Airbnb host, then threw everything in the back of my truck and left the cabin. I don't know if it was that man who came to the house asking for help, or maybe just some random person, but whoever it was had planned for this. I was lucky to have taken such a cautious stance on everything, because if I had opened the door for that man, or not screwed the window shut, then that cabin could have been the last place I ever stayed in. I did deliveries for my parents' restaurant when I was in high school. I had just turned 16 and got my driver's license, and my parents were always wanting to start offering delivery. I didn't want to be a waiter or work at the register, so driving sounded like a good option. When this happened, I had been doing deliveries for a few months, so I was pretty comfortable with it. It was a Thursday, around 8 p.m., and my dad gave me an order to deliver. I got in my car, which was actually my mom's SUV, then started the drive. Google Maps said the house was 25 minutes away. Our town was small, so 25 minutes away was actually pretty far. As I drove, I started to recognize the area as being on the edge of town, and I still had 10 minutes to go. I'd never been this far out in this direction before, so I was definitely paying attention and keeping my eyes open. I wasn't scared per se, but just felt uncomfortable. The only houses I was passing now were farmhouses, far from the main road. When the directions told me to turn, it was down a long, unpaved path going straight to one of these farmhouses. Now I was starting to get a little freaked. A farmhouse this far out at night was probably the last place I wanted to be, but I knew I was probably just spooking myself, and it was just a simple delivery. I drove down to the end of the path, which ended and just became a small grass field in front of the house. It wasn't clear whether or not to drive on the grass, so I just parked the car there and got out. It was eerily quiet. All I could hear were my footsteps on the grass as I walked up to the house. The porch light was on, but no other lights were on inside the house. I was looking over my shoulders constantly and walked quickly. The longer I was out there, the more uncomfortable I was. Just before I reached the porch, I heard something. It sounded like it was coming from the backyard behind the farmhouse, but it was loud, like a wooden door opening. I stepped onto the porch and dropped the bag on the doorstep, then rang the doorbell and started rushing back to the car. I was regretting how far I parked and wished I just drove on the grass. And as I listened to the only sound of my footsteps under me, I started to hear more footsteps running behind me in my direction. I turned around and saw 3 men sprinting at me through the grass. I tried to run back to my car, but in seconds I was tackled to the ground. One of them held me down, while another started taking everything from my pockets. I was yelling and screaming for help, but I knew nobody could hear me. It all happened really fast, and once they looted my pockets, one of the men kicked me in the stomach, and they all ran and got in the car, turning around and driving away. I got up and just watched the headlights disappear on the long empty road. I had no phone and no way to get back. I didn't know what else to do than just start walking toward the road. When I reached the road, I started walking down the way I came. I had no way of telling time, but I think I was walking for 30 to 40 minutes before a patrol car pulled up in front of me. My parents had called for them to check on me because I wasn't responding. To sum it up, the cops found a small barn behind the farmhouse with another restaurant delivery bag inside it. They think they tried to do the same thing to someone before me, but probably missed their chance or chickened out for some reason, because there were no other reports. The actual owners of the farmhouse were out of town, so they had no involvement. My phone was able to be tracked though, and was found thrown in a field off the side of the road, not too far away. The stolen car, however, took 3 weeks to be located. It was found nearly 400 miles away and had been almost entirely emptied. This was almost a year ago now, and those 3 men that attacked me still have yet to be identified. My name is Tommy, and I started doing Uber Eats last year after I lost my part-time retail job. I'd seen their ads everywhere about how the job was so relaxing and easy money, and some of my friends were curious about the gig too. So I took one for the team to figure out if all the hype was true. It wasn't. Driving around on a time crunch made the gig really stressful, and sometimes it would be for just a couple bucks. I was only a teenager, and my only bills I had to pay were my car payment and car insurance, so making a ton of money wasn't necessary, but it did feel like I was getting ripped off for the amount of time and work it was. I pushed aside getting a different job because I was lazy, but after this happened, I quit right away. I picked up an order from a Chinese place and was heading to the customer's address. I don't remember it being a large order or anything. I think it was just a normal small order with a small payout. On the way to their address, I got a text in the Uber Eats app. It was my customer asking where I was. Then another text came in, telling me to hurry up. I was driving, so I couldn't respond, but I was just confused and honestly a little annoyed. I'd just picked up the order a couple minutes prior, so it wasn't like I was running late or anything. I shrugged it off and thought it was just a mistake on their part. The address wasn't far, only about 10 minutes. It was in the less well-off neighborhood in my town though, with pretty old and small houses. It's actually funny though, because the customers in smaller, cheaper houses usually tipped more than the rich people. Anyway, I pulled up next to their driveway and got out of my car, holding their bag of food. What caught my attention as I walked up their driveway was that the house had all of its lights off. It wasn't the most scary thing in the world, but it was something I took note of. When I got up to the front door, I knocked quickly and took my phone out to take the picture of it on the porch. But just as I snapped the photo,
Hey!
a man yelled from my left, standing by the corner of the house. I jumped, then awkwardly said hi. He started walking toward me, taking a key out of his pocket.
I don't know what took you so fucking long.
He walked right in front of me and held the single key up and unlocked the front door. His attitude had me in disbelief. I didn't know what to do or say, so I just stood there like an idiot.
Come here. I need your help since you took your time driving. It'll be quick.
He waited by the door, holding it open.
No, I'm okay. I should really get back to work.
The man looked angry and took a step toward me, reaching out like he was trying to grab me. I jolted my shoulder back to avoid his hand, then backed up and walked away from the porch, and just as I got to the driveway, bright headlights flashed over me. The man by the door ran outside and around the house, leaving the front door open as the car pulled up the driveway. It turned out to be the homeowners returning from dinner. The man I met at the door didn't live there, and the homeowners had no idea who he was or how he had gotten a key to their house. We called the police and explained the situation to them. Knowing everything now though, it made more sense why the man wanted me to rush to the house. He probably knew that the homeowners could be back at any minute, and he wanted to have enough time to do whatever it was he was going to do to me before they got back. I still don't have any answers for what happened that night, or what was going to happen, and I don't think I ever will, but I have stopped doing deliveries. I was a delivery driver for Pizza Hut during college. A bunch of my buddies from school also worked there, so it was laid back and sometimes even fun. It would get really busy with deliveries up until 7 to 8 o'clock, then it would have a sudden drop off in orders. Our place accepted delivery orders until 11, then would only accept pickup orders until 12. It was a Saturday night, so it was busier than most other days, but after 9:30, there were no more orders. We had someone pick up an order around 10:15, but we had nothing else until 10:50 when the phone started ringing.
Hello, this is Pizza Hut.
I waited for a second. I could hear light breathing on the other side, but they weren't responding.
Hello?
Finally, a woman started speaking. She was talking quietly and had a shaky voice. She asked for a small pepperoni pizza to be delivered to her address. I said okay, and just before I hung up, something in me made me ask if she was okay. There was just something off about the way she was talking. She said she was just fine and hung up. I sent the order through, and 15 minutes later I got on the road. The house was a couple blocks away, and there were no other cars out, so I got there in just a few minutes. As I drove up their driveway and parked, I saw a heavy light coming from around the garage where the front door was. I got the pizza and the receipt ready, and as I looked back, I saw the light constantly going in and out, like someone was walking in front of it. I rounded the garage and realized the light was coming from inside the house, shining out the open front door. I stepped onto the porch, and before I even reached the door, I heard footsteps rushing down some stairs inside. Then a man came into the doorway. He was a tall, heavy-set, bald man, but what was really weird was that he was completely out of breath. He was taking big, exhausted breaths and had sweat dripping from his head. Sure, he could have just been working out, but the expression on his face just made it all the more unnerving. He looked angry and frustrated, like he didn't want me to be there. I don't think I've ever seen someone that unhappy that their pizza arrived. I asked him if the order was correct, since he obviously wasn't the one who placed it, which then made me think back to the woman on the phone. Putting everything together made for an uncomfortable possible scenario in my head. I said the total and handed the man the receipt.
Hold on, I need my wallet,
he said, walking down the hall toward what I assume was the kitchen. As I waited for a moment, I heard a quiet sound coming from inside the house upstairs. It was a dull thump, like someone was hitting the wall. I heard it again, louder this time, and seconds later, the man came rushing down the hallway, grabbing the box from my hands and throwing cash at me, then slammed the door in my face. I stood there in shock for a second, hearing the man's footsteps rushing upstairs. I couldn't hear much else, so I walked back to my car while processing everything. Once I got out of their driveway, I drove a minute down the road, then pulled over. I decided it best to call the police and just give them all the information I had and ask them to just do a checkup to make sure it was all okay. When I got back to Pizza Hut, I told my friends about the unusual situation. They thought it was odd too, but none of them seemed worried about it. The rest of my shift went by fast, and I got home at 12:15. Not long after, I got a call. It was an officer that did a wellness check on the woman that I said was at the house. Only, he said there was no woman at all. He described the man, but he was allowed inside the home and never saw anyone else. The man said he lived alone and had no idea what woman I was talking about. I know what I heard though. Someone else was in that house, and it was definitely a woman that called to place the order. The fact that the man was lying about things that I was 100% sure about made me really uneasy. The cop told me that there wasn't much else to be done unless something else came up. It's been a long time since this all happened, but I still think back to it. I could be blowing it all out of proportion, but there's a big part of me that doesn't think so. Having just moved to a new city, I turned to Craigslist to find someone to share my new apartment with. As soon as I saw his post, I contacted him. His name was James. We exchanged a few emails and phone calls, and things seemed to be going well. A few days later, we agreed to meet in person to discuss the details. At first, James seemed like a friendly and easygoing guy. He was in his early 30s and kind of reminded me of myself. We talked for a while about our interests and hobbies, and he shared some funny stories about his previous roommates. As we were wrapping up our conversation, James suddenly got very serious.
There's something I have to tell you. It's kind of important. I have a condition that sometimes makes some people uncomfortable.
I looked at him, confused.
What condition? Sleepwalking,
He said.
and it's pretty severe. I just want you to know that up front in case it was a problem.
I shrugged and said it was fine, not a big deal. The first few weeks went by without incident. James seemed like a great roommate, and we got along well. But then I started noticing strange things around the apartment in the morning. Food would be missing from the fridge, and things would be moved around. I assumed it was just James sleepwalking, but didn't give it much thought. One night, I was awakened by a strange noise coming from James's room. At first, it sounded like he was talking to himself, but then I realized it was something else. A low, growling sound that sent chills down my spine. I got up, quietly crept to his door, and listened. The growling got louder and more intense. I opened the door slowly, and as I peered inside, I saw James standing in the middle of the room, his eyes closed. It was a strange and unsettling sight. I felt like I was seeing something that I wasn't supposed to see, and chose to back away and go back to my room. The sounds went on for a few more minutes before they stopped. In the morning, I refrained from mentioning anything to James so as to not embarrass him. He seemed to be acting normal anyway, so I brushed it all under the rug and forgot about it. Another few days went by, and I found myself waking up occasionally to footsteps in the hallways or doors opening and closing, and sometimes even James making that same growling type noise. I knew it was just James sleepwalking, so it didn't frighten me, but I still had trouble falling asleep unless I heard him go back to bed. One night though, I woke up to James's bedroom door closing. Usually he closes the door softly, but this time it sounded like he had slammed it. My eyes shot open and I stared at my door as his footsteps slowly crept over and stopped. I could see his shadow underneath the crack in the door. Then the doorknob slowly turned and he opened the door softly. James's figure stood in the darkness between the doorway. I was frozen, staring at the creepy roommate. I knew it was him sleepwalking, but it was still a creepy sight. Then he began making those same growling noises. After a moment, he stopped. A second later, his eyes shot open, and suddenly, he lunged towards me. But in seconds, he had me pinned down. His eyes were blank and expressionless.
Stay still,
He said in a monotone voice, as if he was still asleep.
don't move.
I tried to break free, but he was too strong. I felt a deep, intense fear building inside me, and then, just like that, it was over. James released me and slumped off the bed, then lethargically walked back to his room, closing his door softly behind him. I quickly got up and locked my bedroom door, then stayed up for the rest of the night. In the morning, I left for work early, before James even got up. I dreaded the thought of seeing him at home after work, because I knew I would make things awkward. But when I pulled into the driveway, his car wasn't there. I then noticed a lot of things missing from the house, and when I checked his room, it had been emptied. I tried calling James over the next few days, but never got a response. I never heard from him ever again. I have no idea why he left. Maybe he somehow knew what he did and felt ashamed. But if he was truly sleepwalking, then he wouldn't have had any memory of it. It still freaks me out, and my mind associates the encounter with Craigslist, so I stopped using the site. I just hope James really was sleepwalking, because I'm worried that if he wasn't, then he might come back. I had always been a fan of browsing Craigslist for deals and finding unique items that I couldn't find anywhere else. One day I stumbled upon an ad for a vintage record player that was in perfect condition. I couldn't resist sending an email to the seller to inquire about it. To my surprise, the seller responded within minutes, and we quickly began discussing the details of the item. The seller, who went by the name of Jack, seemed friendly and eager to make the sale. We agreed to meet up later that week at his apartment to finalize the purchase. I arrived at the apartment complex at the agreed upon time and made my way to Jack's unit. As soon as I entered the apartment, I could tell there was something off about the place, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Jack welcomed me in, and I noticed he had a strange energy about him. He was jittery and seemed nervous, but I brushed it off as him being an anxious person. I inspected the record player and was pleased to find that it was in even better condition than the pictures had shown. I was ready to make the purchase when Jack suddenly interrupted me, asking if I wanted to see something really cool that he had in the other room. Feeling a bit hesitant, I agreed to follow him. We made our way to a room at the back of the apartment. The room was filled with a ton of objects and things, seeming to be just a collection of complete random. Jack pointed to a large trunk in the corner of the room and said that he had something inside that I might be interested in. As he opened the trunk, I was hit with a musty smell that made me feel lightheaded. Inside the trunk was an old, tattered white sheet. I could tell something was under it, but I didn't care to see anymore.
Sorry, the smell is just a lot.
I turned my head and started walking back to the other room. He stood by the trunk still, calling me back to just take a quick look and saying that I wouldn't regret it. I was too shaken by the strange feelings to even stay. I ignored him and walked right out his door and out of the apartment complex. I was still extremely lightheaded and only seemed to be getting even more so. I stumbled to my car as fast as my feet could carry me. I got in and drove for maybe 20 seconds, barely getting out of the parking lot before I pulled to the side. I felt like I was going to pass out, and I must have, because a few minutes later I woke up. I was groggy and lightheaded, but I managed to drive further down the road and turn into a neighborhood where I pulled over and uncontrollably passed out again. This next part was harder for me to remember, but when I woke, it was darker outside and my head was foggy and unclear. I couldn't make out organized thoughts. Everything was just a blur. I somehow managed to drive home, and as the night went on, I slowly gained more consciousness. As soon as I was able to formulate my thoughts, I called the police. They got to the apartment and were allowed in, but Jack claimed that he had no such trunk, and they never found one. Nothing progressed after that night, but I know something was off. Maybe I am just paranoid, and the smell was just a regular smell that made me freak out for some reason, but I'm pretty sure he had some type of narcotic gas coming from the trunk, and if I stayed much longer, I might have never made it out. I stumbled upon a Craigslist ad for a beautiful antique piano at an unbeatable price. I'd been really searching for one for a while, and these types of pianos can be unbelievably expensive if the seller knows its true value. I emailed the seller, and he quickly replied. He seemed friendly and said he was excited to meet me and show me the piano. The address he gave me was a bit off the beaten path, out in a rural area outside of town, but I didn't think anything of it. Thursday evening, right on schedule, I hopped in my car and started the drive out there. It was already dark, and the winding roads were getting more and more questionable as I went along. I was quickly becoming unnerved. When I finally reached the address that he had given me, it looked like an old church. I guess I just didn't know the difference between an old farmhouse and an old church though. They all kind of looked the same in my mind, so I thought that's what it was. I saw the man walking out of the front door, waving at me and calling my name. Hesitantly, I got out of my car and began to make my way over to him. He was tall and thin, with dull, beady eyes and a quirky smile. He seemed friendly, but there was something off about him.
Welcome,
he said.
I hope the drive wasn't too bad.
I nodded, trying to compose myself and push aside the uneasy feelings. He led me inside the place, which I immediately noticed that it likely was actually an old church, but it had been converted into some sort of makeshift musical instrument museum. There was all kinds of gear lining the walls: drums, banjos, guitars, and a host of other instruments. I didn't spot the piano though. I turned and asked him where the piano was.
"It's downstairs,"
he replied. I hesitated, something not feeling right with the way he said it. Nonetheless, I followed him down a narrow hallway where a staircase led down below. He grabbed a heavy flashlight before starting down those stairs. As we reached the bottom, he turned to me and gave me a lopsided grin.
"It's down here, don't worry."
He shined the flashlight on a small room off to the side. I hesitated, unsure if I should go in, but I was too far in to back out now. We entered the room. The man flicked the lights on, which were dim, just enough to see the piano sitting in the center. The problem was, it looked nothing like the picture in the ad. The wood was chipping, keys were missing from one end of the keyboard, and it was quite a bit smaller than I anticipated.
"It's not quite what I was expecting."
I said, trying to sound polite, but my disappointment was clear in my voice.
"I'm sorry it's not quite what you were looking for,"
he replied. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, watching my every move. I felt like a trapped animal, self-aware and panicky. The whole setup was weird, and I felt like I needed to leave.
"Thanks for this. I think I'll pass on it though."
I looked over at the man, who was still leaning against the wall with a crooked smile on his face.
"Is there anything else you'd like to look at?"
he asked.
"No, I'm okay.
I stuttered, feeling threatened by his tone.
I think that's all for today."
I quickly rushed out of the room, entering the dark, unlit hallway. I managed to find the stairs and quickly made my way up, leaving out the front door. Even though I had managed to escape, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister going on. Maybe it was the way John had looked at me, or the way he acted, or just the tone in his voice. When I got home, I opened my laptop and looked up the address. Online, it showed a picture of the old church. It was labeled as a historical music museum, open only on the weekends for viewings. I looked into it further and didn't find any information about them selling anything. My body shook and I closed my laptop. I had likely escaped something awful. I was already skeptical with sites like Craigslist, but after that, I was done. I haven't used Craigslist or even Facebook Marketplace after that night. Because really, when you think about it, you're taking a gamble on your life over some used items. Don't use Craigslist, and if you do, never let your guard down.